The black maid slept with an empty stomach while the billionaire's baby enjoyed a feast fit for royalty. Her sacrifice went unnoticed until that fateful day when everything changed. The wealthy man's discovery of her selfless act would send ripples through their lives that no one could have anticipated. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Amara Johnson shuffled quietly through the silent halls of the Smith family's Upper East Side penthouse, her footsteps absorbed by plush carpeting worth more than her entire year's salary. The hum of Manhattan traffic, 40 floors below, was nothing but a distant whisper, muffled by triple-glazed windows and layers of luxury. Her stomach growled painfully, a hollow reminder that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but she focused entirely on the tiny bundle in her arms. "Shh, little one," she whispered to Sarah Smith, the billionaire's daughter whose tiny fingers curled trustingly around Amara's thumb. The baby's earlier wails had subsided to hiccuping sobs that only Amara's gentle rocking seemed to soothe. 3 months old and already, Sarah responded to the maid's voice with a recognition that made Amara's heart ache with both joy and caution. The kitchen gleamed with untouched appliances and marble countertops that caught the fading afternoon light. Amara carefully placed Sarah in her bouncer, positioning her where she could watch as the maid prepared her formula. The infant's eyes, dark and curious, followed Amara's movements with unusual focus for one so young. "Your dinner will be ready soon," Amara said softly, her Caribbean accent lilting through the words. Her hands trembled slightly as she measured the powder, a combination of hunger and fatigue making her movements less precise than usual. Still, she double-checked each measurement. Sarah's nutrition was never something she would compromise, even as her own empty stomach twisted painfully. The penthouse felt cavernous around them. The chef had quit last week after another of John Smith's impossible demands. The nanny had followed 2 days later, leaving tearful apologies but firm in her decision. Yet Amara remained, partly from necessity. The money she sent home to Barbados was the only thing keeping her cousin's medical treatments going, but also because of the tiny girl watching her with complete trust. She tested the formula's temperature on her wrist, a small ritual of care performed countless times. Every movement was a quiet act of devotion, invisible to the tech mogul whose empire was reflected in every polished surface of this gilded cage. From his home office down the hall came the muffled sounds of another video conference, another deal being made that would add millions to accounts already overflowing. Sarah cooed softly as Amara lifted her, cradling her with practiced gentleness. The baby drank eagerly while Amara hummed a lullaby her own mother had once sung. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City sparkled like scattered diamonds against the deepening twilight, beautiful and unreachable. "Just you and me tonight, little one," Amara whispered. "Just you and me." John Smith sat hunched over his laptop in the dimly lit home office, the blue light casting shadows across his unshaven face. The tech mogul's name regularly dominated business headlines, but tonight he was just a man drowning in spreadsheets and unfinished proposals. His jaw clenched rhythmically as he scrolled through emails, each one demanding more of what he had less to give: time, attention, certainty. Outside his sanctuary, the Upper East Side penthouse remained eerily quiet. John hadn't noticed the plate of food sitting untouched in the kitchen, growing cold beneath the soft glow of recessed lighting. Nor had he registered the soft humming coming from the nursery, where Amara Johnson rocked his daughter to sleep despite her own gnawing hunger. The clock on his device showed 3 in the morning when he finally closed the laptop. John rubbed his hollow eyes, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect thousands of employees. He stretched, his expensive dress shirt wrinkled from hours of sitting, and ventured into the hallway. He paused at Sarah's nursery, peering through the partially open door. The sight stopped him, Amara cradling his daughter against her chest, the baby's tiny fingers curled around the maid's thumb, even in sleep. The tenderness in that simple gesture made something tighten in his chest. As he watched, Amara carefully laid Sarah in her crib, tucking the blanket around her with practiced precision. Her movements were gentle but efficient, born of countless nights spent caring for a child who wasn't hers. John stepped back, suddenly uncomfortable witnessing this intimate moment. As he retreated, an acrid smell caught his attention. Something burning in the kitchen. He found Amara there, slumped on a stool near the island. She'd attempted to heat something for herself, but had fallen asleep mid-task. The pot on the stove smoked slightly, the contents blackened beyond recognition. But it was Amara herself who truly caught his attention. Curled inward as if protecting herself from the world, shivering despite the apartment's perfect temperature control. Her face, usually composed and dignified, now revealed exhaustion in every line. Her hands, always steady when caring for Sarah, trembled slightly as she startled awake at his entrance. But what struck him most was the unmistakable hollowness in her eyes, the look of someone who had gone without for too long. "Sir, I'm sorry," she began, straightening immediately, professional mask sliding back into place. "I'll clean this up right away." For the first time since she'd entered his household, John truly saw Amara Johnson, not as a function, not as staff, but as a human being who fed his child while her own stomach remained empty. The realization settled uncomfortably in the space between them. Amara Johnson stared in disbelief as John Smith gestured toward the empty chair across from him at the polished mahogany dining table. The tech mogul's eyes, usually fixed on screens and spreadsheets, now studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Please, join me," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. The household staff, the few who remained after the recent departures, froze in their tracks. Mildred Brown, who had been reviewing accounts in the corner, looked up sharply, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. The security guard by the elevator shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I couldn't possibly," Amara began, her Barbadian accent more pronounced in her nervousness. "You haven't eaten all day," John interrupted. "I've noticed." He pushed a plate of steaming food toward the empty chair. Amara's stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. Pride and hunger waged a silent war within her chest as she stood rooted to the spot, Sarah's tiny form still nestled against her shoulder. The baby cooed softly, her small fingers tangled in Amara's braids. "What about Sarah?" she asked, buying time as her mind raced. "She can sit with us too." John's face softened as he glanced at his daughter. "There's room for everyone at this table." Amara hesitated a moment longer before carefully lowering herself into the chair, adjusting Sarah in her lap. The maid promised herself this would be just once, a moment of weakness she would not allow to repeat. Tomorrow, the proper order of things would resume. The first bite nearly brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't realized how desperately hungry she was until food touched her tongue. John ate quietly across from her, his usual commanding presence subdued in the evening light filtering through the penthouse windows. "My mother used to make something similar," Amara said suddenly, surprising herself. "Back home." John looked up, fork paused midway to his mouth. "Where is home?" "Barbados," she replied, then added with unexpected honesty, "though it doesn't feel like home anymore." Something shifted in the air between them. The walls of employer and employee, of billionaire and maid, seemed to thin just slightly, revealing glimpses of the humans behind the roles. "I understand that feeling," John admitted, his gaze drifting toward the Manhattan skyline. "This place, sometimes I wonder if it's really home either." Sarah babbled happily between them, oblivious to the significance of the moment, as two lonely souls found unexpected common ground. In the most unlikely of circumstances, neither was prepared for the vulnerabilities now exposed, nor for how difficult it would be to rebuild those walls once they'd begun to crumble. The package arrived on a Thursday morning, just as Amara Johnson finished changing Sarah's diaper. It sat innocuously on the marble counter of the penthouse kitchen, wrapped in brown paper and secured with twine. Nothing like the sleek, branded deliveries that usually found their way to the Smith residence. For Amara Johnson, read the handwritten label. No return address except for a smudged stamp and one visible word: Brooklyn. Amara's heart quickened as she carefully undid the twine, Sarah babbling contentedly in her playpen nearby. Inside lay a cookbook, not glossy or new, but worn and water-stained, its spine cracked from years of use. Tastes of Barbados was barely legible on the faded cover. Her fingers trembled as she opened to the first page. There, in familiar flowing script, was her mother's handwriting. To my Amara, may these recipes always bring you home when your feet cannot. The date beneath was from 15 years ago, when she was just a girl with dreams bigger than their small village could hold. "Mama," she whispered, tracing the inscription. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg seemed to rise from the pages, carrying memories of Sunday mornings in their tin-roofed kitchen, her mother's hands guiding hers through the motions of kneading dough. Amara sank onto a stool, memories washing over her like waves. Her mother teaching her to make flying fish and cuckoo, the day she'd won a scholarship to study teaching in America, the promise to return that life had made impossible to keep. Who could have sent this? The cookbook had been lost when she'd fled her previous employer's home in Brooklyn, a hasty departure after the man of the house had made advances that left no room for dignity. Sarah's coups pulled her back to the present. The baby was watching her, tiny hands reaching toward the colorful book pages. Amara managed a smile, though unease prinkled at her spine. Someone knew where she was, someone who remembered her past, perhaps even knew her mother. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. She flicked through the pages, finding dried herbs pressed between recipes, notes in her mother's hands suggesting substitutions for ingredients hard to find in America. A small photo fell out. Amara at 16, standing proudly in her school uniform. The mystery of the sender gnawed at her as she carefully tucked the cookbook into her small room off the kitchen. This unexpected bridge to her past threatened the fragile peace she'd built in the Smiths' gleaming tower. Here, she was just Amara the maid. The cookbook was a reminder of everything else she had been and might have become. John Smith noticed it every time, that wistful look in Amara's eyes whenever she prepared meals in the penthouse kitchen. Her fingers would dance across ingredients with practiced precision, transforming simple components into dishes that filled the home with aromas from another world. It was more than skill. It was passion barely contained. One evening, as Amara stirred a fragrant Caribbean stew, John leaned against the marble countertop, watching her work. "You should be doing this professionally," he said, his voice unusually soft. Amara glanced up, momentarily startled by his presence. "This is my profession, Mr. Smith." "I meant as a chef," he clarified. "There's a culinary program at the Institute of Culinary Education. I could arrange part-time enrollment. The family would sponsor it." Her laugh came quickly, too quickly, a defensive shield against hope. "That's very generous, but I'm just fine where I am." The tech mogul frowned, unused to having his offers dismissed. "It's not charity, Amara. It's an investment. Your talent shouldn't be wasted." She turned away, focusing intently on the pot before her. How could she explain that dreams were luxuries she'd long ago packed away? That every dollar she earned went to more pressing needs than personal ambition? "Thank you, but no," she said firmly, ending the conversation. The following afternoon brought an unexpected moment that shattered her carefully maintained boundaries. Sarah sat on the living room floor, surrounded by colorful toys, when Amara entered with freshly folded laundry. The little girl's face lit up instantly. "Mama!" Sarah babbled clearly, arms reaching upward. The room went still. John, who'd been reviewing documents on his laptop, looked up sharply. Amara froze, the laundry basket tight against her chest. "Sarah, sweetie, I'm not," she began, but couldn't finish. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. John's expression was unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of what Amara had become to his daughter. "She's never said that before," he finally murmured. "I'm sorry," Amara whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. "Don't be." That night, after Sarah was asleep, Amara stood on the rooftop garden, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. The word echoed in her mind. Mama. It was a title she had no right to claim, yet one her heart had already accepted. Where did she truly belong in this world of wealth and privilege? Was she merely passing through someone else's life, or building something of her own? The culinary school brochure John had left on her nightstand seemed to pulse with possibility and danger in equal measure. Crystal glasses clinked and laughter echoed throughout the penthouse as Manhattan's elite gathered for Smith Technologies' annual gala. Amara Johnson moved through the crowd in a borrowed navy dress, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. This world of wealth remained foreign territory despite months within its walls. "Excuse me," a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit touched her elbow. "Are you John's new marketing director? I've been hoping to discuss the Asian expansion." For one glorious moment, Amara stood taller, warmth spreading through her chest at being mistaken for a guest. "I'm actually—" "She's just the maid," came a cutting whisper from behind. The businessman's face fell, embarrassment quickly replaced by dismissal as he turned away without another word. Amara set down her tray, the sting of humiliation burning behind her eyes. She slipped through the kitchen and took the service stairs to the rooftop garden, her secret sanctuary when Sarah was asleep. The night air caressed her face as she gazed at the glittering cityscape, millions of lights blurring through unshed tears. The door clicked open behind her. John Smith stepped into the moonlight, his tie loosened and hair slightly disheveled from hours of networking. "Mildred said you might be up here," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mr. Smith," Amara replied, her voice betraying her. "Just needed some air." John leaned against the railing beside her. "I heard what happened downstairs." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "People can be cruel." They stood in silence, the distant symphony of traffic rising from below. Then John spoke, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Sarah isn't mine," he confessed. "Not biologically." Amara turned, studying his profile as he continued. "My ex-girlfriend left her on my doorstep 14 months ago. No warning, just a note saying she couldn't handle motherhood." His knuckles whitened against the railing. "I had no idea what to do with a baby. Still don't, most days." The tech mogul looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence that commanded boardrooms. "Everyone thinks I have everything figured out," he said. "Truth is, I'm lost. Have been since the day Sarah arrived." Amara thought of the little girl sleeping peacefully downstairs, unaware of the circumstances of her arrival. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "being lost is how we find what truly matters." John's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. Two people carrying burdens heavier than the world could see, finding unexpected refuge in shared vulnerability. Amara stood motionless on the rooftop, the Manhattan skyline twinkling behind her as John Smith's confession hung in the night air. The revelation about Sarah not being his biological daughter had stripped away the veneer of the powerful tech mogul, revealing something Amara hadn't expected, a man as lost and overwhelmed as anyone else. "I never planned to be a father," John admitted, his voice barely audible above the distant traffic below. "When my ex left Sarah on my doorstep, I almost called social services." His shoulders slumped as he leaned against the garden railing, looking smaller than Amara had ever seen him. She watched him carefully, remembering the countless nights she'd spent rocking Sarah to sleep while he locked himself in his office. All this time, she'd assumed his distance came from privilege or indifference. Now she understood it was fear. "You didn't, though," Amara said softly. "You kept her." John nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I kept her, but I had no idea what I was doing. Still don't, most days." He glanced toward the penthouse where the baby slept. "Until you came, I was drowning." The following morning, Amara found herself studying the penthouse with new eyes. The gleaming marble countertops, the priceless artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows, they weren't symbols of John's success anymore, but elaborate shields hiding his struggles. Like her own carefully maintained smile that concealed homesickness and uncertainty. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between them. They began sharing quiet moments after Sarah was asleep, John asking about Amara's teaching days in Barbados, Amara listening to his worries about the future. They spoke of loss, his parents' emotional absence, her physical distance from home. Not friends exactly, but no longer just employer and employee. One evening, as they sat reviewing Sarah's new bedtime routine, their hands accidentally brushed. The moment passed without acknowledgement, yet left a warmth that lingered. But their fragile connection faced mounting pressure. Mildred Brown, passing through the kitchen, cast knowing glances their way. James Davis delivered pointed reminders about upcoming board meetings where family image would be discussed. And somewhere across town, Barbara Smith was making calls, determined to protect her son from what she would surely see as an inappropriate attachment. "Mr. Smith," Mildred interrupted one evening, her voice deliberately formal, "your mother has requested you call her back immediately." She mentioned concerns about household staffing. The invisible wall between them instantly reconstructed itself. John straightened, once again the billionaire, and Amara busied herself with dishes, once again the maid. Their brief sanctuary of honesty had been breached by the outside world, reminding them both of boundaries neither could afford to forget. Amara Johnson was folding Sarah's tiny pajamas when Mildred Brown appeared in the doorway of the nursery. The accountant's thin frame seemed to sag under the weight of what she had to say. "Could we speak privately?" Mildred asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In the small staff break room, Mildred slid a folder across the table. "Your paychecks for the past 2 months," she said, tapping a manicured finger against the paper. They were processed but never deposited. Amara stared at the numbers, her throat tightening. There must be a mistake. No mistake. The accountant's eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, held a mixture of concern and resignation. "Someone has been diverting your wages. I've worked for the Smith family for 27 years, and I've never seen anything like this." 2 months of missing pay explained everything. The mounting credit card debt, the missed remittance to her cousin, the nights she'd gone to bed with an empty stomach while ensuring Sarah never missed a meal. The betrayal cut deeper than the hunger ever had. "Do you know who?" Amara asked, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside. Mildred shook her head. "The transfers require high-level authorization. Only 3 people have that access." Amara didn't need her to list them. John, Barbara, or James. Her mind raced through possibilities. John, for all his faults, had been increasingly supportive. Barbara had only recently returned to the penthouse, and James, his smiles always seemed genuine. But loyalty in this tower often followed power, not principle. "I'll look into it myself," Mildred offered, "but be careful. Money reveals truths about people that fancy addresses can hide." After the accountant left, Amara stood by the window overlooking Manhattan. The city lights blurred through unshed tears. She thought of her mother's cookbook, hidden beneath her mattress, of the Caribbean recipes that reminded her of a time when her worth wasn't measured in dollars and cents. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. This penthouse, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, had become a battlefield, and she was done retreating. That night, after tucking Sarah in, Amara began documenting everything. Hours worked, duties performed, conversations overheard. She photographed documents with her smartphone and backed them up to her secure email account. The Upper East Side might run on old money and older secrets, but Amara Johnson ran on something far more powerful: the fierce determination of a woman who refused to be erased. Someone in this gleaming tower had made a grave miscalculation. They thought her silence could be bought or starved out. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The penthouse elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Amara Johnson looked up from where she was folding Sarah's tiny clothes, her hands freezing mid-motion, as an imposing figure stepped into the foyer. Barbara Smith stood there like an empress surveying her domain, draped in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Amara earned in 3 months. "So you're the help my son speaks of," Barbara said, her gaze cutting through Amara with surgical precision. No introduction, no pleasantries, just immediate establishment of hierarchy. Amara straightened her spine. "I'm Sarah's caretaker. You must be Mr. Smith's mother." Barbara's perfectly lined lips twitched. "Indeed, I'll be staying for a while. Family matters require attention." Within 24 hours, Barbara had reorganized the staff schedule, relegating Amara to tasks that kept her away from Sarah. The older woman moved through the penthouse with practiced authority, leaving subtle changes in her wake. Sarah's Caribbean-inspired nursery decorations disappeared, replaced by monogrammed linens and classical music players. "Children need structure, not foreign influences," Barbara remarked loudly during dinner, while Amara served them silently. "Especially children of the Smith family." John frowned, but said nothing. His shoulders hunched under his mother's scrutiny. Amara noticed how he shrank in Barbara's presence, reverting to the uncertain man she'd first met, not the father who'd begun to find his footing. Later that week, Amara overheard Barbara speaking to Mildred in hushed tones. "Check her background again. There must be something we missed. No one is this perfect." The household atmosphere thickened with tension. James passed Amara in the hallway, whispering, "Be careful. She's done this before." The final straw came when Barbara intercepted Amara as she headed to Sarah's room for their bedtime routine. "I've hired a proper nanny," she announced. "Someone with credentials from an agency I trust." "Sarah won't sleep without." "Sarah is a Smith," Barbara interrupted. "She'll adapt to appropriate care." That night, Sarah's cries echoed through the penthouse. Amara paced her small room, fists clenched, each wail like a physical blow. After an hour, her door opened. John stood there, disheveled, holding his screaming daughter. "Please," he whispered, the single word carrying the weight of both request and apology. Amara took Sarah into her arms. The child immediately nestled against her chest, sobs subsiding. "Your mother," Amara began. "Doesn't make the decisions here," John finished, his voice finding unexpected firmness. "Not about Sarah." As Sarah drifted to sleep, Amara met John's gaze over the child's head. In that moment, they formed a silent pact, one that even Barbara Smith couldn't break. The midnight hours in the penthouse held a different kind of silence. Not the emptiness of abandonment, but the weighted quiet of a home where someone remained vigilant. Amara Johnson paced the nursery floor, Sarah's feverish whimpers finally subsiding into peaceful breaths. The child's temperature had broken, but Amara couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. She knelt to retrieve a fallen blanket and noticed something peculiar beneath the crib: a worn manila folder, its edges softened by frequent handling. Curiosity overcame her professional boundaries, and she gently pulled it free. Inside, she discovered page after page of John's unmistakable handwriting, a parenting journal he'd been keeping since Sarah arrived in his life. The entries started formal and detached. Day 3, subject consumed 4 ounces, sleep patterns irregular. But as Amara turned the pages, the tone transformed. Sarah smiled today, Not gas, an actual smile. I felt something crack inside me. Fired the third nanny. She didn't hold Sarah the way Amara does. Like she matters. Amara's hands trembled as she read her own name appearing with increasing frequency. John had been watching her, learning from her, documenting the small miracles she performed without thinking. Amara sang something in Bajan Creole today. Sarah stopped crying instantly. I recorded it on my phone to play when Amara's not here. It never works the same. The tech mogul's vulnerability bled through every page. His fear of failure, his imposter syndrome as a father, his gradual awakening to emotions he'd long suppressed. One entry from just weeks ago made her breath catch. The board wanted me in Tokyo. I declined. Watching Amara teach Sarah to clap seemed more important than a billion-dollar merger. Am I losing my edge or finding something better? The final page held just a single question, written and rewritten several times as if he couldn't get the wording right. What if she stays? Not as staff, but as... Shh. The sentence remained unfinished, trailing off into possibility. Amara carefully returned the journal to its hiding place, her mind racing. The question echoed in her thoughts as she tiptoed from the nursery. A question that blurred the lines she'd so carefully maintained, that acknowledged the family they'd become without naming it. She paused at the threshold of her small room, suddenly aware that her hunger had subsided. In its place was something far more dangerous: hope. The city inspector arrived at the Smith penthouse with a clipboard and a stern expression. John Smith had converted the East Wing into a daycare space for his employees' children, an initiative born from his own struggles as a single parent. Now it faced closure over zoning technicalities. "We need someone who understands childcare regulations," James Davis whispered to Amara Johnson as they watched John argue with the inspector. Amara hesitated, her past carefully tucked away. Few in the household knew she'd been a certified teacher in Barbados before circumstances forced her to leave. She caught Sarah watching her from the playpen, tiny hands reaching out. "I can help," she finally said, stepping forward. John looked surprised when she explained her background. "You never mentioned you were a teacher." "You never asked," Amara replied simply. That evening, after putting Sarah to bed, Amara spread documents across the kitchen counter. Her fingers moved with purpose as she highlighted regulations and drafted proposals. John watched her transform from the quiet maid into a confident professional, her voice steady as she explained educational frameworks. "The board hearing is tomorrow," he said. "They won't expect someone like me?" Amara raised an eyebrow. The tech mogul had the grace to look embarrassed. "I meant someone with your expertise." The next morning, Amara stood before the city board in her best dress, the one she saved for church. The panel of officials looked skeptical as she introduced herself. "I'm here representing the Smith family in-home childcare initiative," she began, her Caribbean accent more pronounced under pressure. "Before I was a maid, I taught children for 8 years. Her passionate defense outlined the program's benefits, how it allowed single parents to work without sacrificing quality care, how it created community in an isolated city. She cited regulations by number and offered practical solutions for compliance. When she finished, the room fell silent. Then, one by one, the board members began nodding, approved with the modifications Miss Johnson suggested. The chairwoman announced. A journalist from the New York Times, covering the hearing for a piece on urban zoning, approached Amara afterward. 3 days later, her story ran with the headline, "The Maid Who Became the Voice of the Voiceless." The article spread across social media. Suddenly, Amara's phone buzzed with messages from old colleagues in Barbados and fellow domestic workers across Manhattan. "I didn't ask for this attention," she told Carmen during their weekly call. "Maybe you didn't ask for it," her friend replied, "but you earned it. People need to see us, Amara, really see us." That night, John left the newspaper on her nightstand with a note. "Thank you for saving something important to me. I see you now." The familiar scent of coconut oil and cinnamon hit Amara Johnson before she even saw Carmen Garcia waiting at the small cafe 2 blocks from the Smith penthouse. It had been nearly 3 years since they'd worked together in that first Manhattan household, where Carmen had shown the newly arrived Barbadian how to navigate the invisible currents of America's wealthiest homes. "You look tired, but good tired," Carmen said, embracing Amara tightly, "the kind that comes from purpose." They settled into a corner table, their hands wrapped around steaming mugs as the autumn chill pressed against the windows. Carmen, now employed by the Goldstein family across Central Park, leaned forward with lowered voice. "I heard things about the Smiths while serving at the charity gala last week," she whispered. "About John's father and the foundation money." Amara tensed. "What kind of things?" "The kind that explain why Barbara watches the household accounts like a hawk," Carmen replied. "The father, he wasn't the saint everyone claims. He built that tech empire, yes, but he also buried financial secrets that could tarnish the Smith name forever." As Carmen detailed what she'd overheard, offshore accounts, misappropriated charity funds, questionable patents, Amara felt pieces clicking into place. Barbara's obsessive control, the missing wages, John's reluctance to discuss his father. "Do you think John knows?" Amara asked, thinking of the man who read bedtime stories to Sarah with such gentle patience. Carmen shrugged. "Rich families are complicated. Maybe he suspects, but doesn't want to know." They met twice more that week, slipping into their native Spanish-English blend that felt like home. Each conversation strengthened Amara, reminding her she wasn't alone in navigating these treacherous waters between worlds. On Sunday, they sat on a park bench watching children play while piecing together what they knew about the missing money. Carmen had connections with staff in 5 different billionaire households, a network of eyes and ears that caught what the wealthy never noticed. "Be careful," Carmen warned, squeezing Amara's hand. "Barbara Smith destroyed 3 careers last year alone, and your bond with Sarah makes you dangerous to her." Amara nodded, thinking of the baby sleeping peacefully in the penthouse nursery. "I can't leave that child." "I know," her friend replied. "That's why we need to protect you." As they parted, Carmen pressed a business card into Amara's palm. "My cousin, he's an accountant. He can help trace where your wages went." Walking back to the penthouse, Amara felt stronger than she had in months. The ghosts haunting the Smith family might be powerful, but she was no longer facing them alone. James Davis slid a manila folder across the kitchen counter toward Amara Johnson. The assistant's usually immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened and dark circles shadowing his eyes. "I've completed the wage claim forms," he whispered, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "The Department of Labor should investigate why your paychecks from April and May disappeared." Amara nodded gratefully. For weeks, she'd been stretching her savings to send money to her cousin back home while still managing her daily expenses. The missing wages had nearly broken her. "Thank you," she said, leafing through the meticulously organized paperwork. "But why are you helping me? You've worked for the Smiths for years." James leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "This isn't the first time money has vanished. 3 years ago, the Smith Family Foundation lost nearly $200,000. The board nearly discovered it, but someone covered the tracks." "Barbara," Amara breathed, the pieces suddenly connecting. The assistant nodded. "I've been gathering evidence since then. Your missing wages follow the same pattern, small enough to go unnoticed by John, but devastating to the person affected." Amara's fingers trembled as she closed the folder. The elegant penthouse suddenly felt like a battlefield with invisible tripwires. She thought of Sarah sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware of the power struggles surrounding her. "Does John know any of this?" she asked. "He suspects something's wrong, but Barbara has manipulated him his entire life. She controls the family narrative." James straightened his tie. "Your arrival disrupted her power. You care about Sarah, about John, without wanting anything from them. That terrifies her. Later that evening, as Amara folded laundry in the nursery, her smartphone buzzed with a text from Carmen. Found something about the Smiths. Need to talk. Meet tomorrow? The walls of the penthouse seemed to close in around her. Every luxury item, the crystal vases, the designer furniture, the priceless artwork, now felt tainted by secrets. When John returned home, exhaustion etched across his face. Amara noticed how he avoided his mother's gaze across the dinner table. The tech mogul who commanded boardrooms looked diminished in Barbara's presence. That night, after tucking Sarah in, Amara added another page to her own journal. She was no longer just fighting for her wages or her position in this household. She was caught in a decades-old family war, with alliances shifting like shadows. The Upper East Side penthouse, with its spectacular views of Manhattan, had become a gilded cage of secrets, and Amara now held the key to its most dangerous lock. Sarah's silence had become increasingly noticeable as the weeks passed. While other children her age babbled and formed simple words, the little girl communicated primarily through gestures and frustrated cries. John Smith paced the penthouse hallways late one night, his smartphone clutched in his hand as he scrolled through pediatric specialists. "She'll speak when she's ready," Amara Johnson assured him, drawing on her years as a teacher in Barbados. "Every child develops at their own pace." The next morning, Amara transformed the nursery. She brought in colorful picture books, musical instruments, and hand puppets she'd crafted from old fabric scraps. The maid arranged everything at Sarah's eye level, creating an environment that invited exploration and expression. "My mother taught me that songs open locked voices," she explained to John when he questioned her methods. The billionaire watched skeptically, but didn't interfere. Each day, Amara incorporated language activities into their routine. During bath time, she named body parts and splashed water to demonstrate splash. While dressing Sarah, she described colors and textures. "This is your red dress, soft, pretty red dress." The nursery walls, once stark and minimalist, soon displayed handmade charts with pictures and simple words. Mildred raised an eyebrow at the transformation, but said nothing when she delivered the household accounts. John began lingering in doorways, watching their sessions. One evening, he awkwardly joined them on the floor as Amara led Sarah through a finger play rhyme. His deep voice, unused to such lightness, stumbled over the words, making Sarah giggle. "You're good with her," he admitted later. "Better than any specialist I could hire." Amara shook her head. "I just remember what it's like to feel voiceless." Winter settled over Manhattan, blanketing the city in snow. One afternoon, as they watched the flakes swirl outside the penthouse windows, Amara wrapped Sarah in a blanket and sang an old Caribbean lullaby. The child snuggled against her chest, eyes fixed on the gentle movement of her lips. When Amara finished the song, Sarah reached up to touch her face. "Thank you, Amma," she said clearly, her small voice breaking the silence. Amara froze, tears welling in her eyes. John, who had entered silently with documents in hand, stood transfixed in the doorway. "She spoke," he whispered, papers falling forgotten to the floor. "She actually spoke." Sarah repeated the phrase, beaming with pride at their reactions. The father crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling beside them with uncharacteristic emotion etched across his face. "Thank you," he echoed his daughter's words, his gaze meeting Amara's. For once, the walls between employer and employee dissolved completely, replaced by something neither could name but both could feel. The scent of simmering callaloo filled the penthouse kitchen as Amara Johnson stirred the pot with practiced ease. What had begun as a small attempt to soothe her homesickness had gradually transformed the sterile Upper East Side apartment. The rhythms of her homeland now pulsed through these once silent rooms. "What's that green stuff?" Sarah asked, standing on her tiptoes to peek into the pot. "This is how my mother fed me when I was your age," Amara explained, lifting the child to see better. "In Barbados, we believe food carries blessings." John Smith appeared in the doorway, his usual business attire replaced by casual clothes. The tech mogul had been changing in subtle ways, his shoulders less tense, his smile appearing more frequently. "Something smells incredible," he said, wandering closer. Amara nodded toward the speaker playing soft Caribbean music. "Food tastes better with music. My grandmother taught me that." Later that evening, after Sarah had been tucked in, Amara folded tiny dresses while humming an old lullaby. She whispered words of protection into each garment, a tradition her mother had performed countless times. The billionaire watched silently from the nursery door, transfixed by this intimate ritual. "What are you saying to her clothes?" he finally asked. "Just old island blessings," she replied, slightly embarrassed, "for strength and joy." Instead of dismissing her customs, John surprised her by asking to learn. The next morning, he awkwardly attempted to follow Amara's movements as she showed him and Sarah a simple Caribbean dance in the living room. His stiff gestures made Sarah giggle uncontrollably. "You dance like a robot, Daddy," the little girl squealed. The household staff exchanged glances as laughter echoed through rooms that had known mostly silence. Mildred Brown smiled knowingly as she passed by with account ledgers tucked under her arm. By the end of the week, John had mastered a few basic steps. The three of them moved together in the spacious living room, the Manhattan skyline a glittering backdrop to their impromptu dance party. For those precious moments, they weren't employer and employee. They were simply people finding joy in movement and music. "My mother would never believe this," John admitted one evening as Sarah fell asleep between them on the couch. Amara nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken. Barbara Smith would indeed be horrified by these cultural intrusions. But in this makeshift family they'd created, something authentic was taking root. The penthouse, once a showcase of wealth but empty of warmth, now hummed with life. For the first time since entering this gilded tower, Amara felt the loneliness recede, replaced by something that felt dangerously like belonging. The scent of jerk chicken and plantains filled the air as Amara Johnson guided a stroller through the pulsing crowd at Brooklyn's Caribbean Festival. She had dressed little Sarah in a handmade dress with bright yellow and blue patterns reminiscent of her homeland. The toddler squealed with delight at each new sight and sound, her speech delay forgotten in the excitement of the moment. "This is your heritage too now, little one," Amara whispered, bending down to adjust the child's headband, adorned with fabric flowers. She had spent hours preparing for this day, wanting Sarah to experience the vibrant culture that had shaped her own childhood. John Smith stood awkwardly nearby, looking distinctly out of place in his casual clothes that still somehow screamed money. The tech mogul checked his smartphone repeatedly, as if expecting the device to provide instructions on how to behave at a street festival. "You can put that away for one afternoon," Amara said, gesturing toward his cell. "Sarah wants to show you something." The little girl was bouncing to the rhythm of a steel drum band, her tiny hands clapping off-beat but with unmistakable joy. John's expression softened as he pocketed his phone and knelt beside the stroller. "She loves the music," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Everyone does. It's in our blood," Amara replied, then caught herself. "In my blood, anyway." A parade of dancers in elaborate costumes swept past, and Sarah pointed excitedly. Without thinking, Amara lifted the child from her stroller and held her up for a better view. The dancers noticed the enthusiastic toddler and came closer, one of them placing a small flower crown on Sarah's head. "Look at you, princess of the festival," Amara laughed, twirling the giggling child around. John watched them, transfixed. When Amara extended her hand toward him, he hesitated only briefly before taking it. The three of them moved together awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as the music washed over them. For those precious minutes, no one looked at them as the billionaire, the maid, and the adopted baby. They were just another family enjoying the celebration, their faces lit by the same festival lights. their bodies moving to the same rhythm. A photographer from a local newspaper captured the moment. Sarah perched on John's shoulders, Amara dancing beside them, all three laughing. None of them noticed the camera flash. Later, as they shared a meal of festival foods spread across a park bench, John wiped sauce from Sarah's chin with the tenderness of a practiced parent. "Thank you," he said simply to Amara, "for bringing us here." She nodded, understanding all he left unsaid. Tomorrow, the penthouse would reclaim them. But today, under the Brooklyn sky, they were free. Amara Johnson stared at the culinary school applications spread across the kitchen counter, the stack of papers seeming to grow taller with each passing minute. The forms demanded proof of her Barbadian credentials, reference letters, financial guarantees, and countless other documents that felt designed to keep people like her out. $300 just for the application fee, she whispered, calculating how many extra shifts that would require. Her fingers traced the requirements for international credential verification. Another $500 and months of waiting. Outside the penthouse windows, Manhattan glittered with promise, but the city's opportunities remained locked behind invisible barriers. Amara had already postponed sending money to her cousin back home for 2 months. Every dollar diverted to her dream meant someone else's sacrifice. John found her still hunched over the papers near midnight, her eyes red-rimmed from squinting at the fine print. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "Sarah will be up at 6. "I know her schedule better than my own," Amara replied with a tired smile. The tech mogul glanced at the application, quickly assessing the situation with the same sharp eye he used for business deals. "Let me co-sign this. It would simplify everything." Amara's spine stiffened. "I can't accept that. It's just a signature," John argued. "It's never just a signature." Her voice was quiet but firm, not when there's a power imbalance. They stood in silence, the gulf between employer and employee suddenly visible despite months of shared late-night conversations and mutual respect. "I've been the recipient of charity before," Amara finally explained. "The gratitude becomes a burden heavier than the original problem." John ran his hand through his disheveled hair. "What if it's a loan, with interest, documented, legal?" Amara considered this. Her pride warred with practicality. The culinary program started in 3 weeks. Without help, she'd miss the deadline and wait another 6 months. "I'll draw up terms," she said finally. "I'll pay every cent back with interest." "I know you will," John replied, understanding the dignity in her conditions. The next morning, James Davis helped prepare the paperwork, his eyes knowing as he watched them sign. This wasn't charity. It was investment in talent. Amara insisted on a formal contract with payment schedules and interest rates slightly above market value. As she signed her name, Amara felt something shift. Not surrender, but partnership. The path forward remained difficult, but for once, she wasn't walking it entirely alone. Amara Johnson stared at the letter, confirming Sarah's acceptance into the free speech therapy program at Columbia University's Children's Clinic. Her fingers trembled with both relief and grief. The sessions would take place every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the exact hours she worked at the Brooklyn Cafe, where she'd been saving tips for her cousin's diabetes medication back in Barbados. "You don't have to choose," Carmen told her over coffee in the staff kitchen. "Ask John for help." But Amara shook her head. "His mother is already telling everyone I'm taking advantage. I won't prove her right." The sacrifice was made quietly. She called her cousin with practiced cheerfulness, promising to send what she could from her main salary. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest as she hung up. But when she entered the nursery and saw Sarah attempting new sounds, the burden lightened. "Please," the little girl struggled, reaching for her stuffed elephant. Amara's eyes welled with tears. This progress was worth everything. Word traveled fast in both worlds Amara inhabited. In the building's service elevator, other domestic workers whispered about her special treatment. "Getting awfully comfortable in that penthouse," one muttered. "Thinks she's part of the family now." Meanwhile, at one of Barbara Smith's charity luncheons, the socialite made sure everyone heard her concerns. "The girl clearly has designs on my son," she said, stirring her tea with calculated precision. Using the child to secure her position, Mildred Brown, who had been quietly tracking Barbara's financial manipulations, overheard and slipped away to send Amara a warning text. That evening, as Amara helped Sarah practice her exercises, John entered the nursery looking troubled. "My mother says you declined the nanny quarters I offered," he said. Amara continued guiding Sarah's small hands through the motions that accompanied her speech practice. "I prefer my apartment in Brooklyn. It keeps things clear." "Clear?" "The boundaries, Mr. Smith." She finally looked up. "People talk, your mother especially." John ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Since when do you care what people think?" "Since my integrity became currency," Amara replied, her voice steady despite the hurt beneath. "I need my work here to be about Sarah, not gossip." That night, as Amara rode the subway home, a text from her cousin showed a photo of empty medicine bottles. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Tomorrow, she would ask James about weekend work at one of John's companies. Some sacrifices left visible wounds. Others, like hers, remained hidden beneath pressed uniforms and unwavering smiles. But her pride? That remained unbroken. The lines between employer and employee had blurred into something neither Amara Johnson nor John could define. Their relationship existed in quiet moments, sharing chamomile tea at 3 a.m. while snowflakes danced outside the penthouse windows, their shoulders almost touching as they leaned against the kitchen counter. They developed unspoken rituals. John would prepare the tea, while Amara checked on Sarah one last time. Sometimes they spoke of their childhoods, his privileged but lonely, hers humble but rich with community. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker below. When reading Sarah to sleep, they unconsciously mirrored each other's voices, creating a harmony that soothed the little girl into dreams. Amara would begin the story with animated expressions, and John would finish with surprising tenderness. The tech mogul, who commanded boardrooms with steely resolve, now softened his voice to whisper goodnight to his daughter. "We make a good team," he said one evening, the words hanging between them, laden with unspoken meaning. "For Sarah," Amara replied, careful to maintain the boundary that kept her heart protected. Their fragile peace shattered when Barbara Smith arrived with legal documents. "A child of the Smith family deserves better than this arrangement," she announced coldly, eyeing Amara with thinly veiled contempt. "I've filed for custody." The lawsuit exposed every vulnerability. Barbara's lawyers painted John as an absent father who delegated parenting to household staff. They questioned Sarah's speech development, suggesting neglect. Each accusation struck like physical blows. John crumbled under the pressure. The man who had built empires now sat hollow-eyed in his office, surrounded by legal briefs. Mildred brought him financial records to review, but they remained untouched. James worked tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering character witnesses. The day of the custody hearing arrived with unforgiving brightness. Barbara sat regally in the courtroom, her expensive perfume filling the air. John's voice faltered during testimony. The judge seemed unmoved by his wealth or influence, only concerned with Sarah's well-being. When Amara was called to testify, she smoothed her simple dress and walked forward with quiet dignity. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke, her Caribbean lilt more pronounced under stress. "I've gone hungry so that child could eat," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I've stayed awake so she could sleep peacefully. That's what family does. and no child should grow up without someone willing to sleep hungry for them. She looked directly at Barbara. Money can't buy that kind of love. The courtroom remained silent long after she finished speaking, her words echoing with undeniable truth. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered his verdict. John Smith's shoulders slumped with relief, while Barbara's face hardened into stone. Custody of Sarah would remain with her father. There was no triumphant celebration, no victory speech, just the quiet understanding that a child would stay where she belonged. Amara Johnson squeezed John's hand briefly before letting go. Her testimony about sleeping hungry to feed Sarah had moved even the most stoic observers. The maid's raw honesty had cut through Barbara's polished arguments about proper upbringing and family legacy. "It's over," John whispered as they left the courthouse. Sarah balanced on his hip. The little girl reached for Amara, babbling happily, oblivious to how close she'd come to losing her makeshift family. That evening, in the penthouse, they shared a simple meal. No champagne, no toasts, just the three of them, bound by something deeper than blood or contract. Mildred brought in paperwork for John to sign, her eyes crinkling with approval as she watched them together. "You did it," James said quietly to Amara when he delivered the last of Barbara's belongings from the guest room. "She won't be back anytime soon." Months passed. Spring bloomed across Manhattan, bringing new beginnings. Amara's culinary school acceptance letter arrived on the same day Sarah strung together her first complete sentence. The penthouse filled with laughter again. On her first day of classes, Amara's hands trembled with excitement as she prepared her inaugural dish at the school's pop-up restaurant. She infused the Caribbean flavors of her childhood with techniques she'd developed while cooking for Sarah. Each ingredient told a story of hunger, of sacrifice, of finding family in unexpected places. The following morning, Carmen called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Have you seen the review? It's in the food section." Amara found the newspaper on the kitchen counter, open to a small column about student chefs. Her dish had received special mention. "The flavor of sacrifice, a taste of love." The words made her throat tighten. She didn't know John had written it anonymously, calling in a favor from a journalist friend. She didn't know he'd sat in the back of the restaurant, watching her shine. She didn't know he'd kept the first plate she'd ever served him, now displayed in his office like a treasure. But somehow, as she traced the words with her fingertip, Amara smiled, as if she did know, as if some part of her had always known that in this unlikely home, her hunger had finally been satisfied.